sermon's title is The Unexpected Answer of God. Sometimes we wonder if God is listening to our prayers or why he doesn't answer them. The first thing you need to be assured of is God knows your needs before you even ask. Matthew 6:8. Second, God cares unequivocally about you. Here are some scriptures that back that up. 1 Peter 5:7, cast your anxiety on him, for he cares for you. Ephesians 5:29, after all, no one ever hated his own body, but he feeds and cares for it, just as Christ does for the church. Nahum 1:7, the Lord is good, a refuge in times of trouble. He cares for those who trust in him. And Jeremiah 29:11, for I know the plans I have for you, declares the Lord, plans to prosper you and not harm you, plans to give you hope and a future. If you are feeling like God does not answer your prayers because he doesn't care about you or your needs, that is a lie from the enemy, and you need to remember what God says. Then believe it and trust that his word is true. The next thing you need to know is we have the assurance that God hears every prayer. Psalm 34:15 says, the eyes of the Lord are towards the righteous, and his ears towards their cry. Psalm 4:3, but know that the Lord has set apart the godly for himself. The Lord hears when I call to him. In my distress, I call upon the Lord. To my God, I cried for help. From his temple, he heard my voice, and my cry to him reached his ears. Psalm 18:6. How does God answer our prayers? Sometimes the answer is yes. You're praying for something and it happens. Sometimes the answer is no, or he chooses to answer differently than what we prayed for. God sees the bigger picture of our lives. He might know that what you are asking for is not the best thing for you, or something you are praying for, or he sees the negative things that could occur if he were to give you what you're asking for. Or perhaps he has something better in mind. If God doesn't give us what we are asking for, we have to remember that he has a good plan and a purpose for everything in our lives, and he only wants the best for us. He's looking at everything from eternal perspective. Our time on earth is meant to prepare us for eternity. God cares about our physical needs, but he is infinitely more concerned about our spiritual needs and growth. This is where knowing God's character and knowing his promises are so important. When we have faith and trust in him, then we can rest knowing that he hears our prayers, sees our needs, and he is faithful to answer according to his will, which is always the best. Sometimes the answer is wait. There is value in waiting. There are many lessons to be taught in our period of waiting. God is never late or early. He is always right on time. But in our frustrated and impatient, in our times of waiting, if we trust God and take him at his word, we know that he wants only the best for us, and it is worth not rushing ahead or trying to force things or make them happen in our own time. There are many things that we will never know or understand this side of heaven. These things like why some people are healed and others aren't, why some people are spared from tragedies and others aren't. We need to know that when our prayers aren't answered, it doesn't mean it's because we are necessarily doing something wrong. Sometimes we can be doing everything right. Remember, when we are living a life that is pleasing to God, we are more of a target for the enemy. We must remember that we have lived that we live in a fallen world and there is evil in the world. God created this world to be perfect, but sin entered in. God does not cause evil. God does not cause anyone to sin or do bad things. Yet God gets blamed for a lot of things that are not his doing. God made a way for us through Jesus, and God does promise to work all things together for good for those who love him. He will redeem what the enemy has meant for our harm. We are told there will be suffering in this world, that we will share in the suffering of Christ. So we should not believe those who misconstrue Scripture and say, if we have enough faith that we will never be sick, or that if we are sick, it's because there's sin in our lives. That we will only have financial prosperity, etc. The Bible is full of examples of people that followed God and were beloved by him, yet faced every form of adversity here on earth. The Apostle Paul, who was one of the most faith-filled people who has walked this earth, prayed 3 times to be healed of an affliction, and God told him, his grace was sufficient, that when we are weak, he is strong in us. Sometimes God allows things for a greater good. An example of this is Joni Erickson. She is one of the most inspiring Christ followers. She has such deep abiding faith, and God has used her quadriplegic and disability to help millions of people around the world. I was astonished to hear that people have actually said to her, if she only had more faith, she would be healed. We can pray, asking in faith and believing with all our heart that God can and will heal us. But at times, he doesn't choose to heal in the life because he has a greater plan and purpose for our illness or infinity. What the enemy has meant for our harm, what the enemy hoped would be a stumbling block to our faith, God will turn around and redeem and use for good and his glory. This story that I'm going to read is kind of a Christmas story, but it goes to the point that we're making here. It was Christmas Eve, 1942. I was 15 years old and feeling like the world had caved in on me because there just hadn't been enough money to buy me the rifle that I had prayed for Christmas. We did chores early that night for some reason. I just figured Daddy wanted a little extra time so we could read in the Bible. After supper was over, I took my boots off and stretched out in front of the fireplace and waited for Daddy to get down the old Bible. I was still feeling sorry for myself, to be honest. I wasn't in much of a mood to read scriptures, but Daddy didn't get the Bible. Instead, he bundled up again and went outside. I couldn't figure it out because we had already done all the chores. I didn't worry about it long, though. I was too busy wallowing in my self-pity. Soon he came back in. It was a cold, clear night out there. And he had ice in his beard. "Come on, Matt," he said. "Bundle up good. It's cold out." I was really upset with him. Not only wasn't I getting the rifle for Christmas, now he was dragging me out in the cold for no earthly reason that I could see. We'd already done all the chores, and I couldn't think of anything else that needed doing, especially not on a night like this. But I knew he was not very patient and at one dragging one's feet when he told them to do something. So I got up and put my boots back on and got my coat. Mommy gave me a mysterious smile as I opened the door to leave the house. Something was up, but I didn't know what. Outside, I became more dismayed. There in front of the house was the work team, already hitched to the big sled. Whatever it was we were doing, wherever it was we were going to do, wasn't going to be short, quick little job, I could tell. We never hitched up the sled team unless we were going to haul a big load. Daddy was already on the seat, reins in hand. I reluctantly climbed up beside him. The cold was already biting me. I was not happy. When I was on, Daddy pulled the sled around the house and stopped in front of the woodshed. He got off and I followed. I think we'll put on the high sideboards, he said. Here, help me. The high sideboards? It had been a bigger job than I wanted to do with just the low sideboards on. But whatever it was we were going to do would be a lot bigger with the high sideboards on. Then Daddy went into the woodshed and came out with an armload of wood. The wood I'd spent all summer hauling down from the mountain. And then all fall sawing into blocks and splitting. What was he doing? Finally, I said something. I asked, "What are you doing?" You've been by the widow Jensen's lately?" he asked. Miss Jensen lived about 2 miles down the road. Her husband had died a year or so before and left her with 3 children, the oldest being 8. Sure, I'd been by, but so what? Yeah, I said. Why? I rode by just today. Little Jakey was out digging around in the woodpile trying to find a few chips. They're out of wood, Matt. That was all he said, and then he turned and went back to the woodshed for another armload of wood. I followed him. We loaded the sled so high that I began to wonder if the horses would be able to pull it. Finally, he called a halt to our loading, and then we went to the smokehouse, and he took down a big ham and a side of bacon. He handed them to me and told me to put them in the sled and wait. When he returned, he was carrying a sack of flour over his shoulder and a smaller sack of something in his left hand. What's in the little sack? I asked. Shoes. They're out of shoes. Little Jakey just had gunny sacks wrapped around his feet when he was out in the wood pile this morning. I got the children a little candy too. It just wasn't Christmas without a little candy. We rode the 2 miles to Miss Jensen's pretty much in silence. I tried to think through what Daddy was doing. We didn't have much by worldly standards. Of course, we did have a big wood pile, though most of that was left now was still in the form of logs that I would have to saw into blocks and split before we could use it. We also had meat and flour, so we could spare, but I knew we didn't have any money, so why was he buying them shoes and candy? Really, why was he doing this? Widow Jensen had closer neighbors than us. It shouldn't have been our concern. We came in from the blind side of the Jensen's house and unloaded the wood as quietly as possible. Then he took the meat and the flour and the shoes to the door. We knocked. The door opened a crack and a timid voice said, "Who is it?" "Lucas Miles, ma'am, and my son Matt. Could we come in for a bit?" Miss Jensen opened the door and let us in. She had a blanket wrapped around her shoulders. The children were wrapped in another and were sitting in front of the fireplace by a small fire that hardly gave off any heat at all. Miss Jensen fumbled with a match and finally lit the lamp. "We brought you a few things, ma'am," Daddy said, and set down the sack of flour. I put the meat on the table. Then he handed her the sack that had shoes in it. She opened it hesitantly and took the shoes out one pair at a time. There was a pair for her and one for each of the children. Sturdy shoes, the best, shoes that would last. I watched her carefully. She bit her lower lip to keep it from trembling, and then tears filled her eyes and started running down her cheeks. She looked up at my daddy like she wanted to say something, but it wouldn't come out. "We brought a load of wood too, ma'am," he said, then turned to me and said, "Matt, go bring in enough to last a while. Let's get that fire up to size and heat this place." I wasn't the same person when I went back out to bring in the wood. I had a lump in my throat, and as much as I hate to admit it, there were tears in my eyes too. In my mind, I kept seeing those 3 kids huddled around the fireplace and their mother standing there with tears running down her cheeks with so much gratitude in her heart that she couldn't speak. My heart swelled with me, and a joy that I'd never known before filled my soul. I had given it Christmas many times before, but never when it had made so much difference. I could see that we were literally saving lives of these people. I soon had the fire blazing and everyone's spirits soared. The kids started giggling when Daddy handed them each a piece of candy. and Mrs. Jensen looked on with a smile that probably hadn't crossed her face in a long time. She finally turned to us. "God bless you," she said. "I know the Lord has sent you. The children and I have been praying that he would send one of his angels to spare us." In spite of myself, the lump returned to my throat and the tears welled up in my eyes. I never thought of Daddy in those exact terms before, but after Widow Jensen mentioned it, I could see that it was probably true. I was sure that a better man than Daddy had never walked the earth. I started remembering all the times he had gone out of his way for Mommy and me, and for many others. The list seemed endless as I thought on it. Daddy insisted everyone try on their shoes before we left. I was amazed when they all fit, and I wondered how he had known what sizes to get. Then I guessed that if he was on an errand for the Lord, that the Lord would make sure he got the right size. Tears were running down Widow Jensen's face again when we stood up to leave Daddy. My daddy took each of the kids in his big arms and gave them a hug. They clung to him and didn't want us to go. I could see that they missed their daddy, and I was glad I still had mine. At the door, he turned to Widow Jensen and said, "The missus wanted me to invite you and the children over for Christmas dinner tomorrow. The turkey will be more than the three of us can eat, and a man can get cantankerous if he has to eat turkey too many meals. We'll be by to get you about 11. It'll be nice to have some little ones around again. Matt here hasn't been little for quite a spell. I was the youngest, and my 2 brothers and 2 sisters had all married and moved away." Miss Jensen nodded and said, "Thank you, Brother Miles. I don't have to say, may the Lord bless you. I know for certain that he will." Out on the sleds, I felt the warmth that came from deep within, and I didn't even notice the cold. When we had gone a ways, Daddy turned to me and said, "Matt, I want you to know something. Your mother and me have been tucking a little money away here and there all year so we could buy that rifle for you, but we didn't have quite enough yet. Yesterday, a man who owed me a little money from years back came by to make things square. Your mom and me were real excited, thinking that now we could get that rifle, and I started into town this morning to do just that. But on the way, I saw little Jakey out scratching in the wood pile with his feet wrapped in those gunny sacks, and I knew what I had to do. Son, I spent the money on shoes for a little candy for the children. I hope you understand." I understood, and my eyes became wet with tears again. I understood very well. I was so glad Daddy had done it. Now the rifle seemed very low on my list of priorities. He had given me a lot more. He had given me the look on Miss Jensen's face and the radiant smiles of her 3 children. For the rest of my life, whenever I saw any of the Jensens or split a block of wood, I remembered, and remembering brought back that same joy I felt riding home beside my daddy that night. He had given me much more than a rifle that night. He had given me the best Christmas of my life.